welcome back everyone to All Things M365 Compliance Podcast. My name is Nikki Chappell. I'm a Principal Cloud Architect at Cloudway, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP in Microsoft 365 and security. And as always, I'm here with my co-host, Ryan. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Hello, everybody. It's good to be back. As you all know, my name is Ryan John Murphy. I'm a former Microsoft MVP, now a compliance TS at Microsoft, which leads me into today's conversation with Max, who's a colleague of mine from CXA. Hi, Max. Thanks and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. My name is Maxime Bombardier. I'm part of the CXE, as you mentioned, Ryan. So as a principal product manager, I help customer define how to best deploy solutions across Purview. I am focused primarily on data security, but I also have a view on where things fits best together. And happy to talk through some of the innovation that we're going to have for documentation guides today.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
And I think data security is just so important. You know, I've been working in this field and kind of the whole governance of Microsoft 365 for quite a long time now. And I think it's just with the advent of Copilot and those risks of, gosh, what data is being found. I think data security is becoming top of mind. And I think, you know, it's taken a long time to get there, but I think, you know, everybody's thinking about how we should secure our data. So it's great that Microsoft, you're bringing out these great guides that can help us on our journey.
It is. And so we're getting a lot of questions. I think we're starting to separate a little bit of that content on how to address from an internal standpoint on looking on what Copilot sees, how can we control what Copilot sees and uses for you. And at the same time, how do we protect the output? How do we look at how users are leveraging Copilot? Are they doing it correctly? Are they using it for not so good reasons? So we have a lot of capabilities around this, and the same way that not just for Copilot, but also across AI, just to get a better grasp across data security. So there's definitely a lot to unpack here.
Perfect. And currently we've got some deployment acceleration guides out already for people to read, haven't we, Max? And they have obviously over time become a little bit legacy to the solutions. The solutions have moved on, especially around MIP, DLP, and the focus of not just even with Copilot coming out, but just in the focus of that data protection side of things and the extensibility that we have with data loss prevention, which is probably leaps and bounds from when the first DAGs were released. Those have recently been updated, right? And that's something that we're going to talk through today to give people the aspect of here is where our one-stop shop around MIP and DLP is going to be and what it's going to be contained within, if you like.
It is. No, thank you for bringing it up. So actually the intent is to move the content that we've had, and so obviously update it, but move a lot of the content from the one-shop stop or OSS you referred to into Learn. And that's going to bring us a lot of advancement, because then content will get auto-translated to various languages that we support on MS Learn. Visibility will get better. So what's going to happen in the coming days, we will have a notes from engineering section appearing in the Purview navigation of MS Learn and or MS Docs for those of you from a couple of years ago. And as we navigate through Purview, if you remember on the left navigation, you'll start seeing notes from engineering appearing. Now, this will start with small, get feedback, but at the same time, we're planning different kinds of content. We're planning to iterate on what's now going to be called deployment models instead of the deployment accelerator guide. So we're changing a bit of terminology. And so I'll go through in a couple of minutes of such an example of the first article that's going to be released. But we're also going to include in that section what we have for call as playbooks or feature playbooks. So a deep dive, if you've seen maybe one for credential scans, there's one today for service-side auto labeling. So think of it as the new section of content that we keep iterating. It is not a content such as blogs that we just point in time. We want to bring the content that we keep iterating. Ninja training is a good example of that. It should be in one place to look at how engineering is informing customers and users on scenarios on how to use best the products.
Okay.
And I think the scenarios part is really, really important because there is so much data on Microsoft Learn. You kind of get that paralysis sometimes. And I know when I speak to customers, they just don't know where to start. And if you just give them a big long list and go and look at, Purview, it is overwhelming. So people want something where they can say, this is the art of the possible. Where do I fit in the model, and how's that going to help? So I think that this sort of scenario-based guides and everything is really, really welcome.
And thank you, because it is, I see this as a story. How do we pick a scenario, and then what's the missing information that we don't have on MS Learn, but also which one is there that we can give you the right order to read the right section. Sometimes it's just a paragraph in the document that we have. There's a lot of good information on Microsoft Learn today. Sometimes just in different navigation trees, there's no order to it, or for the scenario you're trying to achieve. And that's what we're going to be attempting to do. Hopefully we're going to succeed. But the Purview deployment model, and what I'm going to bring with this is a visual as well, to help you have this one slide view of what am I doing? Here's the activities I need to do. The how is the list of the articles, detailed guides, paragraph of content that we're going to add into these. And that's going to be the nuance from the DAGs, or the deployment accelerator guides, Ryan, you mentioned. Is the DAG was great. Last time was in 2021, so we're a bit outdated. We attempted to do an update on this almost 2 years ago. And the challenge is, how do we move up to address the different ways you can use Purview? Purview is more complicated than 3 years ago. There's a lot more capabilities. So it's not complication for the sake of complication. It's just there's a lot of capabilities. And not everybody is approaching it the same way. Are you coming in from just a DLP standpoint? Are you coming in from data security, and you could use all of these products? And there's so many approaches. None of them are bad. There's just different approaches. And that's what we'll attempt to address best with the deployment models.
That sounds really good. And I think from what you've just said, there's a lot of work that's gone into the background to make sure this is actually feasible top to bottom, but is also as readable as you possibly can get to any particular scenario, as long as you can navigate through that guide well enough based on the requirements that you've got as a business, right? So you've got a visualization for us today that we can kind of look through, see if we can get our heads around this new look and feel. And yeah, but from what I've seen previously on some internal stuff, I'm really looking forward to this. Yeah, I really am. So let's have a look at it.
Purview deployment models will include a few different types of artifacts. The visual you're referring to is we're using the term blueprint. It's going to come up in a couple of minutes. I'll show you right there. But it's also including the presentation or the story of how to best address the scenarios, how to talk through that scenarios with speaker notes. The PowerPoint and the PDF versions will be available online. So this is not just an image that's going to go online. I'm sharing the full deck, followed with a detailed guide. Now, detailed guide is not in the presentation. It's going to be the Learn articles, plural. So for example, for this one, it's actually 5 articles in order in 5 different phases. So introduction in 4 different phases. And I'm going to go through quickly the narrative of this one, just to give you the sort of the setting, the frame of this. But this is traditionally this would be called something related to MIP with some DLP and IRM, because we're very product focused. So but I'm trying not to do that. I'm trying to switch a little bit the narrative here about sensitivity labeling, and it's dubbed secure by default with Microsoft Purview and protect against oversharing. So this is both for internal and external oversharing. And as part of that narrative and we're going to give a quick overview today. What if we change the behavior within an organization from how they label today, which is roughly 3 to 5% of your documents, right? Today, we're focused from auto labeling. We're focusing on training users when to secure. What if we flip this around, secure almost everything, and train users on when not to secure? An interesting piece here is it gives us that thought into, okay, what are labels for? Are they for classification or are they for protection? And that stems a bit of the rethinking of when and they're for protection. You can leverage them a little bit for classification, but the core of why and how we built sensitivity label is about protection. So when we start looking into that secure by default and see the methods that we can apply better defaults through the mix of publishing or tenant defaults, through the use of default library labels in SharePoint, and then just training users to know where to put information when they need to go outside of the bounds of the company. So when I need to share externally. And that's the gist of that story. I'm giving a quick overview today. This is a 25 pages guide. I could speak through this for hours, as some of you have heard. So I think we're going to jump on some of the individual, but please I'll take questions in parallel. So as I switch, we might switch back and forth within this slide. And as part of the narrative that we have here is to fulfill this secure by default, I'd like to provide a starting point recommended label taxonomy. And you're going to see here it's similar, yet slightly different in our default taxonomy that we have publicly documented. I've simplified it. And the reason for that is this is essentially the minimum that you should have in most organizations. You can start nuancing it. You can add labels for segments of your employee population. You can think of trusted partners. There's some sub-scenarios that I go into details. But at the end of the day, we have essentially general, confidential, and highly confidentials. And as a good starting point. In general, I've removed the sub-labels or the child labels. And the purpose for that is just to make it easy. General is there to make it simple for emails to have allowing maybe public and private sites if you'd like to for SharePoint containers, and you allow sharing. This is where we'll protect through other means. But then a confidential all employees, confidential specific people, and maybe the surprising there, confidential internal exception are the interesting ones here.
As soon as I saw that, I thought internal exception. I'd like to know more about that one.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing it up. And that's literally the intent of having it called like this. Taxonomy is always a bit of a challenge. I've seen companies get stopped for 18 months plus just on taxonomy and trying to figure out what the labels should be named. This one I've gone through different iterations. You might have seen some presentation at Microsoft or with Microsoft employees. You've seen the default guidelines. It says, if I recall correctly, any users unrestricted. Yeah. And the challenge with those words and the mix of those words is it really any user? Do I want to say that? Do I want to say it's unrestricted? That kind of leaves the door open for users to always pick that for fun. It's like, I don't know, I'm just going to pick that. So the interesting thing here is if we follow, the full talk track about I'm securing by default and I'm training users on when to manage exception, then internal exception, the label, at the end of the day, the difference is it's not encrypted. I'm not attaching an encryption on it. However, I'm attaching different DLP policies. I'm attaching different insider risk management policies to look at the behavior as if Ryan is suddenly changing all of his documents to internal exceptions or general, right? So you are going to look at the unencrypted label a little bit more through the rest of the Purview suite. But think of how much easier it is for if you default to confidential on employees, your DLP strategy changes radically. Because now you can truly have good DLP policies on labels. You don't even need content inspection. After all, why should I allow sharing externally if it's confidential all employees? So you start training users on better behaviors because now it's encrypted and I need to think of, I'm going to make a mistake, by the way. I'm going to share you an email that says all employees. I've done that. And then you can't open it. You're going to contact me back. It's like, oh, yeah. And I'm going to think about, did I do the right thing? Is this something that's truly for outside? Yeah, okay. I'll change the label once. So training the users on exception is essentially two things. It's better SharePoint library defaults. And we have some features coming up for that. It's going to make it a lot easier. But think of it as files to share if all the three of us are sharing often information. I'll create a SharePoint site. I'll assign the right label to the site and make sure that all the information that goes in there will default to that label. So I only had to think about it once.
That's amazing. And it often surprises me, and I think me and Nick have talked about this before, is how many people don't realize that capability is available to them at the SharePoint library setting. And when you bring it to their attention, I'm like, oh, wait, so I have to apply this once to the library and everything within the library gets it? And yeah, That's simply it. Oh, right. Cool. That's the better strategy than just trying to use default labeling lazily, just so you've got everything labeled, right? And you're not just talking about a segmented portion of data in a repository at that point. You're talking about anything and everything. And that's the way I've seen customers go. They've gone, well, we need to label everything, and so we'll just use a default label. And now they're in a position where they've got tons and tons, even millions of items labeled with this default label that means nothing to the actual item it's applied to.
That's right.
So this is definitely, even from looking at this in my own experiences, this is definitely something that I can see people going, I get it now.
I think one of the things that I get feedback from is people are still not sure what the difference between the group and site label is and the file and items label. So where we're talking currently, and the current ways of working is the group and site label does not by default now apply file or item level. So it is a secondary step, isn't it, to go in if you've got the E5, G5, A5 licensing, compliance licensing, to go in, isn't it, to the document library and apply it. So if you want to do something clever, you'd have to do something programmatically now, wouldn't you, to say, this site is labeled general, therefore I will automatically add the default label to the document library.
You're right. And there are some, so it is scriptable today. And I can talk about through some strategy. Actually, it's a good lead into the next, finally the visual actually. So we'll run out of time before we actually show the visual. But as I talked about the blueprint, I go into stages on how to implement this. And you're going to get a couple options in this case, Nikki. I will answer your question as well. The how can be a few things. So today, scripting, manual, it depends on the amount of sites. So if I talk to companies that have hundreds of thousands of sites, the strategy is not going to be exactly the same as a smaller company where you have a SharePoint admin that has a good handle on these. You can leverage SharePoint admin, you can leverage script, and we're looking into providing this capability in the interface to link essentially what we call container label or the sites and group labels to the file label. So stay tuned for this to see how it's going to look, but we intend to continue on the greatness of the default library label to give you what I call a little bit of a contextual labeling in a sense. It's a better default. You might have seen the narrative from Microsoft internal IT when we implemented this. We call this intelligent default, and it's just giving you that power to the end user and the site owners to make that call. So as I think through how to get there, I looked at the first step is really foundational, and most organizations should be able to start with the recommended labels I put in the previous slide. And the reason for that, and yes, there's going to be nuances. And I like to say that there's three things that, as I show the right amount of fingers, three things that delays deployment, and it's typically taxonomy, as I mentioned first. Auto labeling is the second one because it becomes a hunt for false positives. Yeah. And then the third one is typically encryption. And encryption generally breaks for a few reasons, but the message I'd like to say for everybody is start small. Like if I can encrypt most of your documents and well, maybe not emails yet, but let's say most documents to all employees tomorrow, even though anybody can change the label in the organization, give them co-owner rights. You would already be more secure than yesterday. You can iterate on that tomorrow.
Very good.
And
point.
if you do that, and we tend in IT, I'm in there. I've been in there for quite some time. We try to overthink things. We're trying to make it perfect. Security is not perfect. It moves so quickly. And what I'm trying to do here is give you a good way to advance quicker and then iterate through the additional scenarios you'll identify them over time. Trying to pre-think of those is very difficult. So start small in the sense of simplicity. Start simple, then grow, but get the scale of documents. And I'll talk about the benefits for Copilot as well, because how can I not talk about Copilot in any sessions nowadays? So for the quick pieces under here, the detail guide gives you all of these switches, the turning on data security prerequisites and events analytics, turning on labeling for SharePoint, activating the PDF rendering, the co-authoring, all of those switches. In the detail guide, I have hopefully a comprehensive list of all
I have a list, hopefully it's all of them, of all the features that needs to be turned on. And then I give you an option. Well, if we're starting to default having more labels, turn on DLP for label content. So those of you that have not used this, and traditional DLP is on sensitive info types, this doesn't require content inspection. If it's confidential, all employees. If it's confidential, it's internal, block it. Block sharing. And then allow users maybe to override if you want to allow this. Allow users to go back and change their label, and then they can go on. So as you see with this visual, I'm going to have each section will have their dedicated outcomes for each of these. I'm going to give you some very aggressive efforts and not timelines on how to set this up. And then in this context here, once you've set that up, any new and updated content is protected, because now you have a publishing or tenant-wide default, and you start having the right recipe to deploy it on SharePoint. Your foundational is there. The second part is called it managed in this case, but it's addressing the file. Think of it as the manual step. It's especially for large organization. It's just starting small into, I know about the sites that I want to address first. I'm going to go in and manually configure those default library label. So Nikki, you're asking me, how do we do it? Start small, go with the sites you know, go and set it up manually. Now, that gets you going from both an admin standpoint, from a supportability standpoint. That's how you get ramped up into knowing how you want to teach and train the users. But at the same time, if you look at the second bullet, it says auto labeling on credentials and some contextual conditions. So what I mean here is credentials are one of the most sought information by organization. We have a great sensitive info type. If there's any auto labeling I would recommend, that would be for credentials. Well, one thing I didn't mention before is if you're defaulting most documents to all employees, you really only need to auto label for highly confidential. So see how I've shifted the problem to, I'm already doing a better job than yesterday to encrypt. Auto labeling should be in most cases for higher sensitivity, because I already have a good default. So that's when, and you can start introducing those concepts. Now you can turn on DLP for content that is not labeled. And then you can start preventing users that, hey, you haven't labeled this, please go label. So you start going on at the time that users are trying to share. And then you can start introducing some concept from insider risk with adaptive protection for users that are lowering a lot of labels, their risky behaviors. They want to, you want to address that and implement adaptive protection to start blocking them more proactively if they're risky users.
And I think this is one of the, I'm going to sound like a real Microsoft fanboy here, but I think this is one of the reasons why I think our solutions are so much better than others, because we build everything to work together, right? So you've literally just gone through that. Sensitivity labels, data loss prevention, adaptive protection, insider risk management, plus the audit, okay? Those 5 major elements of our stack is all built to see what the other one is doing. That's why you can have this seamless, in a way, depending on what your business requirements are, way of working. And you can really ramp this up, like you're saying. Within a couple of weeks, you can literally be in a point where you're like, I'm comfortable with where I am right now. And the regulators are comfortable with where I am right now, should they be a part of your organization. I love that.
That's right. And this is a recipe. I'm sure there's more recipes, but this is a recipe to help you achieve that. And it's also trying to change some of the stigmas that we could have over time of what we knew of sensitivity label. It's not that it was wrong. It's just a different approach. It could be some about DLP that we go from. I mean, most DLP implementations are migration from tools that you're moving around, keeping the old policies that you built maybe 15 years ago from 2 or 3 tools before, and then you bring it in. And when you want to get the benefit of the platform, as you say, you have to also shift into, okay, how do I use it best so that it works for me? Because for me, downstream is also, we got some great power. I don't go into this in details for this one. Analytics, Copilot for security. If I use the platform where it's built for, at the best that it's built for, these tools will get you much more benefits down the road as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I was playing around with Copilot for Security the other day, with someone from that specific team, just working on some of the scenarios that I've worked with around MIP, DLP, even e-discovery, IRM, logs, and so on and so forth. And its capabilities was mesmerizing to me. You know, with a couple of words in a prompt, off it goes and brings you back all of this information. And I cannot wait. I seriously cannot wait for the new Purview connector for Copilot for Security to have the updates that I can see that are in here as well, Max, around all of that analytics, that deep dive analytics. And you don't have to do anything. It's just pushed into a mailbox somewhere of, here's a label that's just been downgraded and copied to a USB, for example, or someone's downgraded an email and sent it outside to external recipients. You don't have to do anything. You come to your desk in the morning, you press Control-Alt-Delete, you add in your password, and you have an inbox of stuff, of all the good stuff of what's in front of you right now. I love that. That's amazing.
And if we expand this one, what's fascinating here is, and again, this is a foundation for me for organization to get successful in data security. And if we expand the talk today, I know it is MIP heavier, and then we touch point on DLP and insider risk. I have the same thing coming up eventually for DLP. And how do we secure by default with DLP? Because if you think about this basis here, and just high level thinking of data loss prevention, you should think about what kind of file types do you want to allow sharing externally. Just from the get-go, you should limit to what you want to allow, and then break off for the rest. And then, so, okay, you get starting a lot of Office documents, a lot of PDF. Of course, there's going to be other file types that you need to share, and it's going to be different per industry. That's fine. So when you start doing this, you can essentially create DLP that blocks everything, and then you follow them down to, for the file types that I'll allow, here's the ones that support labeling. So Office formats and PDF. Here's the strategy for DLP with that. We already touched point on DLP for labeled. Here's the rest of the DLP policies that I need to do for the files. So say docx that I'm allowing to share externally with, and then I look at SIDS. I've already funneled down the DLP component a lot at this point, because now I'm only looking at that part of that lens. I'm not looking at that haystack. I'm just looking at a handful of needles at this point, and then I look deeper. So it reduces a lot of the false positive negativity. I know, kind of pun intended, I guess, but we're looking at too many noisy signals.
Yeah.
It makes AI work better for you as well. And then, but it simplifies your whole strategy for data loss prevention too. So SITs are not going away. Auto labeling is not going away, but now they're truly for the purpose left rather than doing it for everything.
Yeah. I think you clicked onto something I come across a lot of the time. And I think, again, me and Nick have spoke about this before, is just wrapping all SITs into a DLP policy, and then the noise in the background, it's just like this tsunami of logs that they have to deal with. And like you're saying, though, and I think that you're right, you're using the right wording that I didn't think of it before myself, is you're funneling down that potential of just being able to give you nothingness in the background. And it doesn't even mean anything to you, just because it's there and you're able to put them into a DLP rule doesn't mean you have to. Filter down, what are your business requirements? What are your priorities from a data perspective? Add those in, start testing with those. And if you have to create multiple rules in a policy, even create multiple policies, based on that topical subject that you're working with. So I like the wording there, funnel it down. That's very much going to stay with me now, I think. Sorry, Nikki, I think I cut you off there.
No, I think it's the right approach. It's kind of have it simple first. It's kind of internal data, external data, and then it's trying to prioritize linking, the container labels and the kind of file labels. Because again, that's the kind of strategy when I speak to companies. Don't necessarily try and tackle your millions and millions of files first, auto labeling. Focus on your sites where you've got a few, maybe thousands of them. Highlight which ones are you kind of your business critical and your sensitive one. Focus on that data first, protecting the container, and then saying, what can we do with the file? So this kind of all kind of aligns with the way that I would think as well.
Indeed.
And that ties in well into the next stage that I put there, because the one in yellow here, I call it managed. it's kind of the manual step. I'm getting you started because we got to start somewhere. A lot of implementation, we try to fix everything before we even start. I'm trying to do a bit of the opposite, because already if I can get better defaults tomorrow, we're going to stop talking about, there's an expression, stop the bleeding type conversation. It's, we stop talking about the new information and information people are working on. So if you can do that, then it takes you 18 months for the next step. Hopefully it doesn't. But if it does, that 18 months of data you've worked on is already secured. So you're already better. And as you move to optimize here, this is where I want to address the historical data. Now, auto labeling, it's a repeat of the conversation we had. Think of it as just, what are the other scenarios that I need to think about? Is there for highly confidential in most cases? Yes, you can think of reducing false positive with trainable classifiers, with EDM, exact data match, and document fingerprinting, or R advanced classifiers. Sure, you keep moving on those. But you can also leverage the service-side auto labeling to, and again, if you think confidential all employees, I know this site has this container label, I want to touch on historical data. That's a super simple service-side auto labeling rule, because all you got to say, point to that SharePoint, apply this label. You don't need to look at sets. You don't need to think again too much. Apply this. And going back with the mantra of training users on managing exception, if you train them well on how to change the label, if they need to for the right purpose, then they can put a justification in when they change that label. So think of it as going at scale for historical data at that third steps. And as I move to the fourth one, this is more of an open set of guidance into operational review. And I like to talk here about, okay, what should I look at? I need to look at when there's deviations. Insider risk management is going to help you for some of it, but I also want to know, okay, there's a site that's confidential, but the default library label is general. I should look at that deviation. So those are the kind of reporting you're going to want to build on. There's some capabilities built in. Some of them requires APIs to go and find the information that's relevant to you. And I'd love to know more of those scenarios so that we can build additional reporting. But at the end of the day, you're looking at mostly at deviations of the standards and see how users are leveraging these. And you start setting up your accountability chains across for SharePoint. So you can leverage, there's a number of tools. I mean, SharePoint Advanced Management is great for that. I know there's other ones to help you ensure that you don't have ownerless sites, that you can have attestations of the site still being in use, that kind of concept coming into the importance of SharePoint. And then you can start thinking of extending also MIP protections across for oversharing scenarios for non-M365. So we are currently in preview for SQL. We are as well for ADLS and S3. Fabric has also been announced. This is in private preview. Some great capabilities that extends what we talked through, but on non-M365 data.
Yeah, cool. I think just one thing I'd like to touch on that is the first one under the strategic is the operational review of user labeling behaviors. And I think this is, again, another great way for us at Microsoft, and I really do sound like a Microsoft fanboy today, but bringing the likes of Sentinel into that operational use as well. I've helped a number of customers just, from not giving everybody access to the Purview portal, Max, and bringing that logistics, those logs into your SIEM solution, which is Sentinel, and even just building very basic KQL queries with Copilot for security to say, I want to understand how many labels have been labeled the last 90 days that are manual versus auto labeling. What's my top label usage? Who's my top label downgrader, and so on and so forth. Customers bringing that into the aspect as well, while we're, like you were saying, maturing those logs in the background, bringing all those new audit target elements in as well. For anybody out there at this moment in time is wanting to look into that, you can have a jump on my GitHub and have a look there, but there's a plethora of them about as well. And I think that's a greater way for that whole Microsoft ecosystem for you to get what you want when it comes to those advanced or additional logging, monitor, alerts when it comes to MIP and DLP.
And in this one, I go in stages. I mean, there's basic reporting in the portal. And then the next stage is you can create, we got some examples that got published on blogs for Power BI to leverage the management API. So that's going to be for 30 days of data. And you can get, for most cases, good enough through Power BI. This way, you can build your own, basically. So think of it as the default we have in the portal, plus what else you're thinking with the same data. And then to your point, we can then expand outside. Sentinels are a great way to do that and build KQL query. And I'd say The step above that is, I've seen some solutions, community solutions, and including one from my team on like full reporting. Now you're exporting data, you have retention of that data for X amount of, you choose basically, but you're sending everything out. Now you got to manage this data too. So we got to think about what's the security mechanism on that. But I've seen some great use case for that. But the shift though is compared to before you're looking at how users, it's the whole know your data mantra that we had. And I'm okay with it. I'm kind of changing that because I don't want it to be a blocker for you to start.
Yeah.
Because the know your data is this big, oh my God, I'm finding all these sets. Yes, we're going to have the ability to reduce what you see for what you care. That's going to help. I know, that's so I can, a couple examples, New Zealand's driver's license, but I'm in North America. Okay, the medical terms, like, apparently everything's medical. They're noisy sets. It's not that they're incorrect. Their definition is they are what they are for a purpose, but they're noisy. How you use them is super important. The problem is right now is the interface just throws all of that at you. So I'm very careful about the know your data because it is a great tool for awareness. You got to get in the right mindset for how you use it. And it shouldn't necessarily be like the traditional crawl, walk, run. It says, start by knowing your data. No, start by securing it first. Then use that to see where it needs to be highly confidential. So it's that huge shift. And the reason I'm linking it here to your point is previously I would look at the behaviors of labeling, but because users don't label by default. So now I'm really looking for those deviations rather than they're applying it. No, I just want to know when they don't. I want to know when they change it to something unsecured.
Yeah. And I have to say, I love the fact, two things I clicked onto there is there's potentially going to be a way for you to kind of remove those sits out of your visibility should you need to. And then the second one is the know your data piece. The amount of conversations that I've had with customers and they've gone away and gone into absolute analysis paralysis, trying to figure out every single file that they have in every single repository before they think about labeling it. If we're now going to take that into a different roadmap, that's definitely going to help customers straight away because they're going to think, all right, I just need to know what's in these because I know this is my higher priority stuff or whatever the case may be, right?
And I want to go back to this because the essence of what you just said is the know your data led into conversations about taxonomy of labels. Labels became a classification means. It shouldn't. I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying you shouldn't. And the nuance here is I get, the downstream questions I would get for feature requests is, can I apply multiple labels? And why is there a limit of 600 by default labels that you can apply in a tenant? And scratching your head, but why? Why do we have so many labels? Why do you want to apply multiple labels to the same file? And then once you start digging that, it's kind of a downstream of the know your data. So, it's because it's classified for this and classified for that and classified for that. And I've seen that countless times. And the challenge there is it becomes that paralysis by analysis is we're trying to think of all the scenarios in a 2D system, a tree view basically of labels. It's about information protection.
Yeah.
It's all about this. So, and you can see, and that's why I bring this slide back is all the terms I've used here is about how I'm protecting. It's not about what I'm protecting.
Yeah, because I also find with some customers when they've had a written policy, so they've had like a policy for a long time on the paper, and then when you try and transpose that into the data protection rule, you'll end up with 4 labels with all the same protection. So you just say, well, no, each label has to have its unique set from this is just potentially a label only, maybe for public with no controls over it. So like your general, and then you start layering in the encryption and the user-defined permissions or whatever the edge cases are. But a lot of people had confidential and highly confidential with exactly the same rules. So said, well, that just doesn't make sense. How do you explain that to users? Which one do they need to use?
The worst thing you can do to label, and that's what Max speaks, it is if the user has to think about what the label does, we're already missed the boat a little bit, because now it's like, oh, what's different here? Which one do I pick? And the more complex this is, and this is why some of the recommendations, you might have heard the term 5x5, meaning 5 parent labels, no more than 5 parent labels and no more than 5 child labels. And I'm trying to stay well under that. I can see when there's deviations from that, but the default of this is I don't really know personally what's the difference between confidential and highly confidential. I don't know if I need to secure that highly confidential. Like, I'm a CVP, and of course everything I do is highly confidential. Well, not quite. So not necessarily, right? It's those, and different personas might have different answers to the same sentence I just said. So this is all about protection and getting to that sense of let's have a road, at least a target, that we could think of confidential all employees becoming a default. And we can go in stages, by the way. And in fact, you can even start without encryption. Because again, DLP on these files can still work even if you don't have encryption. I'm just protecting you if wherever the file goes after. That's a cool piece about it. But you can start without encryption. If that's what makes you start to label more, do it. Because then what's super interesting here is, and I think we're coming out of time, but I need to talk about Copilot. But the quick thing about the Copilot piece here is I'm addressing briefly both internal and external oversharing. Quick highlight, because we're going to have full guidance, similar visuals, and I showed earlier with a blueprint for addressing internal oversharing. And when you think about it, internal oversharing is for Copilot use, it's all about turning off site privacy or turning it to private. Most sites, I know we love collaboration, and we might have gone a little bit too public internally with stuff, but turning it to private, leveraging container labels or site labels to do that. Applying and removing triple E, so the everyone except external, everyone except external group, removing large security groups. So there's great tools like SAM or SharePoint Advanced Management to help you do that. But that's the internal oversharing piece. This helps you secure the response of Copilot, because Copilot will pick the highest priority label that you have there. So that flows downstream, which is the really good part. That's why they work great hand in hand together.
Well, what a way to end. I think that was really on point. Again, really thankful for your time. Having been working at Microsoft, I know it's very hard to get product group. So really appreciate your time today, Max. Nikki, any closing comments from you, or any closing comments for you, Max?
I mean, I must say, as a consultant, I spend my time I feel like sometimes I'm the translator from all of the technical documents and trying to get something in place with the organization. This is like really helpful, because too many times you said that know your data, it's almost like lifting up the box. You show them all of those sensitive information types and they're just like completely scared off, and they just put the lid down and say, no, it's all too difficult. So having that kind of phased approach makes it much easier.
Cool.
There's so much more to talk, but thank you for having me. Honestly, it was my pleasure. Happy to come back. There's a lot to uncover. Data security is very, very important to us. We want to help customers leverage best, secure faster. This is one of those steps. I think, as I mentioned, DLP will have some of the ones addressing for oversharing for Copilot. And we're looking at more scenarios too, including insider risk management. Why DLP admins should care about insider risk management, right? So it doesn't have to be this other team. So I would say stay tuned, but the new content series will showcase all of these.
Perfect. And of course, myself, Nikki, will share those on the podcast here, on my website, and any other avenues on LinkedIn and X and so on and so forth. So again, once again, Max, thanks very much for your time. It's been a really good one. Speak to you all soon. Thanks very much for joining us today.
See you all next time.
Thank you.
Bye.